Here we go.
Don't forget to swallow.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Learning Mending. I'm Jen, and before we begin tonight's series, I wanted to start out with our embroidery of the week. And this week, we are featuring the hermit thrush that Vicky Maturo embroidered, and it's a part of our bird series, and it is absolutely beautiful. And I will then start with, we'll do popcorn introductions as we're all settling in. As I said, I'm Jen. I use she, her pronouns, and I am calling in from Studio City. And tonight, I am really meaning it this time. I'm closing in on my bird. I don't know if you can see, I have just a very little tiny bit of the face to go and then a couple of leaves. But I'm super excited for those of you that have done the birds. Everybody seems to do the outside and work their way in. Everybody, hands down. It's been kind of an interesting thing to notice. So now I will pass it to Lauren.
Oh, Lauren, I'm going by she, they pronouns, calling from downtown Los Angeles. And I am starting a new one tonight. I'm starting one of the mycelial networks. Excited to be here, and I will pass it to Cecile.
Hi, I'm Cecile. I'm here in San Juan, Puerto Rico. I am a beginner, I think, here, but I'm hoping that it will turn out somehow interesting. But I'm happy to join in and looking forward to listening tonight. Thank you so much, and I'll pass it on to Stefano.
Hi everyone, Stefano here from El Sereno. Happy to be here as always with you all, and I'm excited for another episode of Learning and Mending, and I'll pass it on to Olan.
Hello, Olan, using she, her pronouns in West Hollywood, working on this, starting to bring in some colors to the golden threads. And I will pass it along to Jay Tumbleweed.
Hey y'all, I'm Jessie. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm coming to you from a place that is referred to as New Mexico. And so I joined, I was here a year ago with y'all, and it was so much fun. And I remember your faces and voices and stuff like that. And this time, thank you. Hi, Izzy. And so I'm psyched because I have embroidery stuff by now. Woo! Happy to be here. Thanks. I choose, let's see, I choose Nancy.
Hello, I'm Nancy. I'm in Culver City. I'm not working on an embroidery right now, but I'm looking forward to this evening. Thank you. And I choose Stefano.
Um, I already went, but
Oh, I'm sorry.
it's okay. Um, I can pass it on to Izzy.
Hi everyone, I'm Izzy. My pronouns are they, she. I'm calling in from Metabolic Studio tonight, and I will be listening and working on some collage. And I will pass it on to Kavi.
Hey, good evening. Thanks, Izzy. Kavi calling in from Sacramento. My pronouns are he, him. And tonight I'll be listening along and doing a little bit of sketching as well. And I'll pass it on to Susan.
Me? Hi, I'm Susan. I'm from Hollywood, live in Hollywood. And this is my second time, and I got my embroidery kit. I'm very excited. I've never embroidered before, so I'm going to try to figure it out as I'm going. I was going to Google it tonight, but I haven't had a minute. So I look forward to, I love this book. So thank you for including me. Oh, and I'm going to pass it on to Beth.
Hello, I'm Beth Abels. My pronouns are her and she, us and we. And I'm in the Los Angeles area and have a bumblebee or a native bumblebee that I've been working on for over a year now in embroidery that is not right here with me, but I'm happy to be here. Sorry, I since I'm late, I'm not sure who has not been introduced, but I'm going to go with James.
Hi, I'm James Oliver, calling in from Los Angeles. My pronouns are he, they, and tonight I will be gardening while listening to everybody read. I can't really see because I've got gloves on and just listening on my headphones, so I don't know if maybe Jen wants it back, or I don't know if somebody else.
I do. Perfect timing. Thank you, James.
Thank you.
If you didn't have an opportunity to introduce yourself or share what you're working on, you can do so later on this evening. As I said, welcome to Learning and Mending. Since the pandemic began, Metabolic Studio has moved our weekly open studio practice to Zoom. This is our 7th syllabus, and connecting all of them is the embroideries we continue to make and collect of the living systems we discover as we regenerate the floodplain we're salvaging on Gabrielino land. If you need another or have not received an embroidery kit from us featuring native plants, birds, and microscopic organisms that Metabolic Studio is currently cultivating on its project sites, please send your name and mailing address to info@metabolicstudio.org. I'll put that in the chat too. She Braids Together follows syllabi on abolitionist writing, Fires of the West, Anna Sings the Mushroom at the End of the World, Freetoff Capra's Web of Life, and The Commons. This time around, we'll be focusing on one text, Braiding Sweetgrass. Robin Wall Kimmerer explores more than human teachers and braids indigenous wisdom, scientific knowledge, and the wisdom of plants to tell us stories about the world. The world that is opened up to us through this text is the commons in the truest sense. It is a world of reciprocity and careful listening. Thank you, Izzy Santana, for interweaving Tending the Commons and She Braids Together by curating this selection from Kimmerer's book. This series, even more than earlier ones, is exploring non-didactic, hierarchical model, as in no one specific will be leading our series. Please join us by both reading selections and guiding the discussion afterwards collectively. As in earlier syllabi, we suggest this book be read together aloud. When you hear a pause in the reading, please feel free to unmute yourself and begin where the last person left off. You don't have to read. We also welcome you to enjoy a gentle and supportive space of listening. We invite you to stand at the precipice of Zoom silence and stare it down. Even relish the charged silence of crafting together. Our evening will close revealing an interpretive offering from our collection of videos. Thank you, Emily Lacey, for this offering. Each week on social media, we are sharing photographs of native prairie grass by Jim Richardson, courtesy of the Beach Museum at Kansas State University. Thank you to Linda Duke, curator at the Beach Museum, for coordinating the Writing by Kansas State University's community. We will share more about these grasses in our chat bar. And now I will pass it over to Izzy, where she will introduce tonight's chapter.
Thank you, Jen. So in this week's reading, Kimmer shares her experience navigating the chasm between Western scientific knowledge and Indigenous knowledge, the former a narrow-minded reductionist worldview produced by empirical science, and the latter a worldview in which poetry and beauty and spirit are not divorced from science and medicine. And instead of accepting these kind of binaries or these worldviews as unbridgeable, Kimmer finds a way to cross-pollinate or kind of, braid together these two forms of knowledge, creating another braid within our entangled world. So I'm really excited for this chapter. It naturally builds off the discussion we had last week. If you were able to make it for that, if not, this is a great place to start. And welcome everyone. So I'll pass it to Emily for the screen share of the text.
Thanks, Izzy. Happy to be here. Let me pull up the text. I wanted to share with you all that I have a banana bread cooking in the oven right now, and it smells so good. And I wish I could give you all a little tiny piece of it. So I'm going to send it through the Zoom psychic channels to you as we read.
Asters and goldenrod. The girl in the picture holds a slate with her name and class of 75 chalked in. A girl the color of deer skin with long, dark hair and inky, unreadable eyes that meet yours and won't look away. I remember that day. I was wearing a new plaid shirt that my parents had given me, an outfit I thought to be the hallmark of all foresters. When I look back at the photo later in life, it was a puzzle to me. I recall being elated to be going to college, but there's no trace of that in the girl's face. Even before I arrived at school, I had all of my answers prepared for the freshman intake interview. I wanted to make a good first impression. There were hardly any women at the forestry school in those days, and certainly none who looked like me. The advisor peered at me over his glasses and said, "So, why do you want to major in botany?" His pencil was poised over the registrar's form. How could I answer? How could I tell him that I was born a botanist? That I had shoe boxes of seeds and piles of pressed leaves under my bed, that I'd stop my bike along the road to identify a new species, that plants colored my dreams, that the plants had chosen me. So I told him the truth. I was proud of my well-planned answer, its freshman sophistication apparent to anyone. The way it showed that I already knew some plants and their habitats, that I had thought deeply about their nature and was clearly well prepared for college work. I told him that I chose botany because I wanted to learn about why asters and goldenrod looked so beautiful together. I'm sure I was smiling then in my red plaid shirt.
But he was not. He laid down his pencil as if there was no need to record what I had said. Miss Wall, he said, fixing me with disappointed smile, I must tell you, that is not science. That is not all sort of things with which botanists concern themselves. But he promised to put me right. I'll enroll you in the general botany so you can learn what it is. And so it began. I like to imagine that they were the first flowers I saw over my mother's shoulder as the pink blanket slipped away from my face and their colors flooded my consciousness. I have heard that early experience can attune the brain to a certain stimuli so that they are processed with greater speed and certainty, so they can be used again and again, so that we remember. Love at first sight. Through cloudy newborn eyes, their radiance formed the first botanical synapses of my wide-awake newborn brain, which until then had encountered only the blurry gentleness of pink faces. I'm guessing all eyes were on me, a little round baby all swaddled in bunting, but mine were on goldenrod and asters. I was born to these flowers and they came back for my birthday every year, weaving me into our mutual celebration. People flock to our hills for the fiery sweet of October, but they often miss the sublime prelude of September fields. As if harvest time were not enough, peaches, grapes, sweet corn, squash, the fields are also embroidered with drifts of golden yellow and pools of deepest purple, a masterpiece.
If a fountain could jet bouquets of chrome yellow and dazzling arches of chrysanthemum fireworks, that would be Canada goldenrod. Each 3-foot stem is a geyser of tiny gold daisies, ladylike in miniature, exuberant, en masse. Where the soil is damp enough, they stand side by side with their perfect counterpart. New England asters. Not the pale domesticates of the perennial border, the weak sauce of lavender or sky blue, but full-on royal purple that would make a violet shrink. The daisy-like fringe of purple petals surrounds a disc as bright as the sun at high noon, a golden orange pool, just a tantalizing shade darker than the surrounding goldenrod. Alone, each is a botanical superlative. Together, the visual effect is stunning. Purple and gold, the heraldic colors of the king and queen of the meadow, a regal procession in complementary colors. I just wanted to know why. Why do they stand beside each other when they could grow alone? Why this particular pair? There are plenty of pinks and whites and blues dotting the fields, so it is only happenstance that the magnificence of purple and gold end up side by side. Einstein himself said that God doesn't play dice with the universe. What is the source of this pattern? Why is the world so beautiful? It could so easily be otherwise. Flowers could be ugly to us and still fulfill their own purpose, but they're not. It seemed like a good question to me. But my advisor said, it's not science, not what botany was about. I wanted to know why certain stems bent easily for baskets and some would break, why the biggest berries grew in shade and why they made us medicines, which plants are edible, why those little pink orchids only grow under pines. Not science, he said. And he ought to know, sitting in his laboratory, a learned professor of botany. And if you want to study beauty, you should go to art school. He reminded me of my deliberations over choosing a college when I had vacillated between training as a botanist or as a poet. Since everyone told me I couldn't do both, I'd chosen plants. He told me that science was not about beauty, not about the embrace between plants and humans. I had no rejoinder. I had made a mistake. There was no fight in me, only embarrassment at my error. I did not have the words for resistance. He signed me up for classes and I was dismissed to go get my photo taken for registration. I didn't think about it at the time, but it was happening all over again, an echo of my grandfather's first day at school when he was ordered to leave everything, language, culture, family behind. The professor made me doubt where I came from, what I knew, and claimed that he was the right way to think. His was the right way to think. Only he didn't cut my hair off.
In the morning, from a childhood in the woods to the university, I had unknowingly shifted between worldviews, from a natural history of experience in which I knew plants as teachers and companions to whom I was linked with mutual responsibility, into the realm of science. The questions scientists raised were not, "Who are you?" but "What is it?" No one asked plants, "What can you tell us?" The primary question was, "How does it work?" The botany I was taught was reductionist, mechanistic, and strictly objective. Plants were reduced to objects, they were not subjects. The way botany was conceived and taught didn't seem to leave much room for a person who thought the way I did. The only way I could make sense of it was to conclude that the things I had always believed about plants must not be true after all. The first plant science class was a disaster. I barely scraped by with a C and could not muster much enthusiasm for memorizing the concentrations of essential plant nutrients. There were times when I wanted to quit, but the more I learned, the more fascinated I became with the intricate structures that made up a leaf and the alchemy of photosynthesis. Companionship between asters and goldenrod was never mentioned, but I memorized botanical Latin as if it were poetry, eagerly tossing aside the name goldenrod for Solidango canadensis. I was mesmerized by plant ecology, evolution, taxonomy, physiology, soils, and fungi. All around me were good teachers. The plants I found were good mentors too, warm and kind professors who were doing heart-driven science whether they could admit it or not. They too were my teachers, and yet there was always something tapping at my shoulder, willing me to turn around. When I did not know how to recognize what stood behind me.
My natural inclination was to see relationships, to seek threads that connect the world, to join instead of divide. But science is rigorous in separating the observer from the observed and the observed from the observer. Why two flowers are beautiful together would violate the division necessary for objectivity. I scarcely doubted the primacy of scientific thought. Following the path of science trained me to separate, to distinguish perception from physical reality, to atomize complexity into smaller components, to honor the chain of evidence and logic, to discern the one thing from another, to savor the pleasure of precision. I think it needs to be scrolled down. The more I did this, the better I got at it. And I was accepted to do graduate work in one of the world's finest botany programs, no doubt on the strength of the letter of recommendation from my advisor, which read, "She's done remarkably well for an Indian girl." A master's degree, a PhD, and a faculty position followed. I am grateful for the knowledge that was shared with me and deeply privileged to carry the powerful tools of science as a way of engaging the world. It took me to other plant communities far from the asters and goldenrod. I remember feeling, as a new faculty member, as if I finally understood plants. I too began to teach the mechanics of botany, emulating the approach that I had been taught.
It reminds me of a story told by my friend Holly Youngbear Tibbets. A plant scientist, armed with his notebooks and equipment, is exploring the rainforests for new botanical discoveries. and he has hired an indigenous guide to lead him. Knowing the scientist's interests, the young guide takes care to point out the interesting species. The botanist looks at him appraisingly, surprised by his capacity. Well, well, young man, you certainly know the names of a lot of these plants. The guide nods and replies with downcast eyes. Yes, I have learned the names of all the bushes, but I have yet to learn their songs. I was teaching the names and ignoring the songs. When I was a graduate in graduate school in Wisconsin, my then husband and I had the good fortune to land jobs as caretakers at the University Arboretum. In return for a little house at the edge of the prairie, we had only to make the nighttime rounds, checking the doors and gates were secure before we left the darkness to the crickets. There was just one time that a light was left burning, a door left ajar in the horticulture garage. There was no mischief, but as my husband checked around, I stood and idly scanned the bulletin board. There was a news clipping there with a photo of magnificent American elm, which had just been named the champion for its species, the largest of its kind. It had the name Louis Vu elm. My heart began to pound, and I knew my world was about to change, for I had known the name Louis Vu all my life, and here was his face looking down at me from a news clipping. He was our Potawatomi grandfather, one who had walked all the way from the Wisconsin forest to the Kansas prairie with my grandma, Chanot. He was a leader, one who took care of the people in their hardship. The garage door was left ajar. That light was left burning, and it shone on the path back home for me. It was the beginning of a long, slow journey back to my people, called out to me by the tree that stood above their bones.
To walk the science path, I had stepped off the path of Indigenous knowledge, but the world has a way of guiding your steps. Seemingly out of the blue came an invitation to a small gathering of Native elders to talk about traditional knowledge of plants. One I will never forget, a Navajo woman without a day of university botany training in her life, spoke for hours, and I hung on every word. One by one, name by name, she told of the plants in her valley, where each one lived, when it bloomed, who it liked to live near and all its relationships, who ate it, who lined their nest with its fibers, what kind of medicine it offered. She also shared the stories held by those plants, their origin myths, how they got their names, and what they have to tell us. She spoke of beauty.
Her words were like smelling salts, waking me to what I had known back when I was picking strawberries. I realized how shallow my understanding was. Her knowledge was so much deeper and wider and engaged all the human ways of understanding. She could have explained asters and goldenrod. To a new PhD, this was humbling. It was the beginning of my reclaiming that other way of knowing that I had helplessly let science supplant. I felt like a malnourished refugee invited to a feast, the dishes scented with the herbs of home. I circled right back to where I had begun, to the question of beauty, back to the questions that science does not ask, not because they aren't important, but because science as a way of knowing is too narrow for the task. Had my advisor been a better scholar, he would have celebrated my questions, not dismissed them. He offered me only the cliche that beauty is in the eye of the beholder, and since science separates the observer and the observed, by definition, beauty could not be a valid scientific question. I should have been told that my questions were bigger than science could touch.
He was right about beauty being in the eye of the beholder, especially when it comes to purple and yellow. Color perception in humans relies on banks of specialized receptor cells, the rods and cones in the retina. The job of the cone cells is to absorb light of different wavelengths and pass it on to the brain's visual cortex, where it can be interpreted. The visible light spectrum, the rainbow of colors, is broad, so the most effective means of discerning color is not one generalized jack of all trades cone cell, but rather an array of specialists, each perfectly tuned to absorb certain wavelengths. The human eye has three kinds. One type excels at detecting red and associated wavelengths. One is tuned to blue. The other optimally perceives light of two colors, purple and yellow. The human eye is superbly equipped to detect these colors and send a signal pulsing to the brain. This doesn't explain why I perceive them as beautiful, but it does explain why that combination gets my undivided attention. I asked my artist buddies about the power of purple and gold, and they sent me right to the color wheel. These two are complementary colors, as different in nature as could be. In composing a palette, putting them together makes each more vivid. Just a touch of one will bring out the other. In an 1890 treatise on color perception, Goethe, who was both a scientist and a poet, wrote that the colors diametrically opposed to each other are those which reciprocally evoke each other in the eye. Purple and yellow are a reciprocal pair. Our eyes are so sensitive to these wavelengths that the cones can get oversaturated and the stimulus pours over onto other cells. A printmaker I know showed me that if you stare for a long time at a block of yellow and then shift your gaze to a white sheet of paper, you will see it for a moment as violet. This phenomenon, the colored afterimage, occurs because there is energetic reciprocity between purple and yellow pigments, which goldenrod and asters knew well before we did.
If my advisor was correct, the visual effect that so delights a human like me may be irrelevant to the flowers. The real beholder, whose eye they hope to catch, is a bee bent on pollination. Bees perceive many flowers differently than humans do, due to their perception of additional spectra such as ultraviolet radiation. As it turns out, though, goldenrod and asters appear very similarly to bees' eyes and humans' eyes. We both think they're beautiful. Their striking contrast when they grow together makes them the most attractive target in the whole meadow, a beacon for bees. Growing together, both receive more pollinator visits than they would if they were growing alone. It's a testable hypothesis. It's a question of science, a question of art, and a question of beauty. Why are they beautiful together? It's a phenomenon simultaneously material and spiritual, for which we need all wavelengths, for which we need depth perception. When I stare too long at the world with science eyes, I see an after image of traditional knowledge. Might science and traditional knowledge be purple and yellow to one another? Might they be goldenrod and asters? We see the world more fully when we use both. The question of goldenrod and asters was, of course, just emblematic of what I really wanted to know. It was an architecture of relationships, of connections that I yearned to understand. I wanted to see the shimmering threads that hold it all together, and I wanted to know why we love the world, why the most ordinary scrap of meadow can rock us back on our heels in awe. When botanists go walking the forests and fields looking for plants, we say we're going on a foray. When writers do the same, we should call it a metaphor, and the land is rich in both. We need them both. Scientist and poet Jeffrey Burton Russell writes that as the science of a deeper truth, metaphor was close to sacrament. Because the vastness and richness of reality cannot be expressed by the overt sense of statement alone. Native scholar Greg Gaete has written that in indigenous ways of knowing, we understand a thing only when we understand it with all four aspects of our being: mind, body, emotion, and spirit. I came to understand quite sharply when I began my training as a scientist that science privileges only one, possibly two of those ways of knowing: mind and body. As a young person wanting to know everything about plants, I did not question this, but it is a whole human being who finds the beautiful path.
There was a time when I teetered precariously with an awkward foot in each of two worlds, the scientific and the indigenous. But then I learned to fly, or at least try. It was the bees that showed me how to move between different flowers, to drink the nectar and gather pollen from both. It is this dance of cross-pollination that can produce a new species of knowledge, a new way of being in the world. After all, there aren't two worlds. There is just this one good green earth. That September pairing of purple and gold is lived reciprocity. Its wisdom is that the beauty of one is illuminated by the radiance of the other. Science and art, matter and spirit, indigenous knowledge and Western science, can they be goldenrod and asters for each other? When I'm in their presence, their beauty asks me for reciprocity, to be the complementary color, to make something beautiful in response.
Okay, we're just going to conclude this section and we'll take a moment while I go forward to the next section. So hang on just a bit. Okay, this is our next section, these 2 pages here.
A note on the treatment of plant names. We accept with nary a thought that the names of people are capitalized. We write George Washington. To write George Washington with no caps would be to strip that man of his special status as a human. It would be laughable to write mosquito if it were in reference to a flying insect, but acceptable if we were discussing a brand of boat. Capitalization conveys a certain distinction, the elevated position of humans and their creations in the hierarchy of beings. Biologists have widely adopted the convention of not capitalizing the common names of plants and animals unless they include the name of a human being or an official place name. Thus, think. The first blossoms of the spring woods are written as bloodroot, and the pink star of a California woodland is Kellogg's tiger lily. This seemingly trivial grammatical rulemaking, in fact, expresses deeply held assumptions about human exceptionalism, that we are somehow different and indeed better than the other species who surround us. Indigenous ways of understanding recognize the personhood of all beings as equally important, not in a hierarchy, but a circle. So, in this book, as in my life, I break with those grammatical blinders to write freely of Maple, Heron, and Wally when I mean a person, human or not, and of Maple, Heron, and human when I mean a category or concept.
A note on the treatment of Indigenous language. The Potawatomi and Anishinaabe languages are a reflection of the land and the people. They are a living oral tradition which had not been written down in their long history until fairly recently. A number of writing systems have emerged to try and capture the language in regularized orthography, but there is no firm agreement on the preeminence of any one among the many variants of a large and living language. Potawatomi elder, fluent speaker, and teacher Stuart King has kindly sorted through my rudimentary use of the language, confirming meanings and advising on consistency in spelling and usage. I am most appreciative for his guidance in my understanding of language and culture. The Fierro system's double vowel orthography for writing the language has been widely adopted by many Anishinaabe speakers. Most Potawatomi, however, known as the vowel droppers, do not use Fierro. With respect for speakers and teachers with these different perspectives, I have tried to use the words in the way that they were originally given to me.
A note on Indigenous stories. I'm a listener and have been listening to stories told around me for longer than I care to admit. I mean to honor my teachers by passing on the stories that they have passed on to me. We are told that stories are living beings. They grow, they develop, they remember, they change, not in their essence, but sometimes in their dress. They are shared and shaped by the land and the culture and the teller, so that one story may be told widely and differently. Sometimes only a fragment is shared, showing just one face of a many-faceted story, depending on its purpose. So it is with the stories shared here. Traditional stories are the collective treasures of a people and can't easily be attributed with a literature citation to an individual source. Many are not to be publicly shared, and these I have not included, but many are freely disseminated so that they may do their work in the wider world. For these stories, which exist in many versions, I have chosen to cite a published source as a reference, while acknowledging that the version I share has been enriched by hearing it multiple times in different tellings. For some, I do not know of a published source of a story passed on in the oral tradition. Chi megweche to the storytellers.
Is anyone else as emotional as I feel about this passage?
The first or second passage are you talking about? The one about the asters and goldenrods, or the one about telling stories?
I guess the whole of it. Yeah. Because I mean, it's obvious like she had to go through a difficult evolution to be able to straddle both worlds of science and the more inclusive indigenous worldview way of knowing. And that she was able to convey that without resentment, but rather this incredible grace and insight, and talk about words like love, like why is it that we feel love for the world when we stand at the edge of a meadow and are just struck by awe? I mean, that's genius. It's genius of empathy and art and everything together. And so I was just overwhelmed by emotion.
I felt myself really opening up to the different ways of being, especially listening to the first one, but to the second one as well, but mind and body, spirit, and whatever the fourth one was. I felt I was more engaged as a whole person. And when they were talking about the color wheel, I was thinking about, as a photographer, when I first learned about the color wheel, and learned about the purple and the gold and the reciprocal colors. And it was bringing me back to a time in my life when I was more whole, I think, and open to new things.
I really like how open she is about the struggle to be accepted in her field and the struggle of narrowness in her field. Like, it's so much of a richer and true story to hear about how hard it's been for her to establish the framework that we engage in the book. And I just think it's so valuable, when narratives are complex like this, and it's not like, oh, it was so easy and I just landed, and look at how well I've done, and triumph and joy. It's like, no, she felt totally out of place and totally alienated, and look at the value that she has created for all of us through this will to keep going and to share, and for her to grow herself.
Yeah, I felt really personally connected to this chapter as an Indigenous poet. And when I was in undergraduate, I was studying philosophy. I wasn't studying science, but I wanted to do my thesis on bridging like this theory of being by Heidegger with like Indigenous kinds of understandings of existence. And I was trying to talk about colonialism, and my advisor was like, what do you mean there was no colonialism in America? There's no colonialism in America right now, pointed out. And I was just like, are you kidding me? What do you mean there's no colonialism? Even in the humanities, in a human rights philosophy department, I'm being told there's no colonialism. And it was so painful, like it shattered me. And I felt kind of the way that she's describing, of just being like, I guess I'm in the wrong, what am I doing? I'm in the wrong area. But then learning to go through it on the other side and not being resentful, like reading that, I think was just, it was really powerful, and kind of just like a reminder of shared experience, and also ways of navigating these dichotomies, not just in, say, science as an Indigenous person or someone who's invested in different types of worldviews, but also as just a person navigating the world, these things you run up upon. So I think she just provides a really good kind of guide to being patient and moving slowly and not being judgmental of yourself too.
Yeah, I mean, another person might have just been caught up in the friction of the personal level of exclusion that she felt, that Emily was referencing. But she cut right to the chase, and then she says, oh, it's the bees that taught me how to straddle the two worlds. And what I mean also by that is that she cut to the chase of the epistemological kernel there that is fundamentally so different. And that is that the way of seeing of science objectifies the world. It objectifies nature, and it makes nature this inanimate sort of substance that you refer to with a lowercase letter. It has no animacy, no will, no rationale, no spirit, no expression, and no song, really, is the word that she used. And she just cut to that and didn't get caught up in her own circumstances, which that is truly remarkable. You know, we've read so many great things in this series, and I can't remember. Sometimes I write things down, but I can't tell you which episode of our amazing series it's from. But I remember the word multi-epistemic knowledge and how we need to be able to use science for what it's valuable for, the precision that it gives, the understanding of the way things work, but as well to include the knowledge that comes from other epistemologies and from other cosmologies. And I think the term was multi-epistemic knowledge, but I couldn't tell you which reading it was from. Yeah, it could be.
I can't remember what, I'm gonna try to dig into the syllabi.
Honestly, it's been a theme in so many of the readings, and Izzy, you'd probably be able to trace the lineage back. Yeah.
And I could probably help too. What were you connecting the dots about on, Sue?
Lauren, it was the word multi-epistemic knowledges. In other words, that we would not limit our understanding of nature to be p-values and the measurement of chemicals between things, but to also understand their song and to understand their way of being animated and having intelligence. And
was it Anna Tsing? Mushroom at the End of the World? It seems, it sort of rings a bell when you're saying that to her talking about the associations between all living things. And I think some of the readings that we did had to do with her experiences in the forests of Washington State. And, and I think you were responding to that partly because it was a kind of strong opposition to the Fritzoff Capra readings that we did on a systems view of life, which seemed, quite sort of European sort of rational science thinking. And it might have been Anna Tsing.
Might have been from last fall. Yeah.
Could have been Dr. Shiva as well. Was it about Dr. Shiva? I think it might have been,
Yeah.
I mean, because I think she does a lot of writing about the way that we've tried to sell the idea of starvation as a justification for genetically modified seeds, which is absurd because nobody can own the relationship between individuals and the seeds that they plant, and that seeds will always respond and change to their environment and to the stewards they're in a interdependent relationship with. So it might have been Dr. Shiva as well. But it's definitely there's been many authors that we've looked at that challenge a reductionist idea of the complexity of the world into kind of a niche that we sometimes like to call nature, as if there's us and nature, and everything that isn't us goes into the category of nature. So it kind of others us from nature. So we've been actively trying to organize these syllabi to uplift the greatest complexity possible for our interrelationship with the community of living things that we share space and time with.
Yeah. But anyway, that concept is exactly what this reading reminded me of.
Yeah.
One thing that I really appreciated about this text was how, and her writing in general, she does a really good job completely disassembling people's argument. So she starts by just presenting this, like, her advisor being like, oh, you know, if you want to study that, you should study art, you're in the wrong department. And she goes from that to being like, you know, he was actually right, it was about beauty, and then gives a completely like skillful, tight argument as to why the purple and the gold go together, and completely, she does it in a way that's not even like, I hate you, you're wrong, and this is why I'm right. She just really cleanly dismisses him entirely. And I hope that he read that. Like when I was reading that, I was just like, for everyone who's ever been in those relationships with advisors or professors, like thinking about just dissing them like that, I just really hope he got to read that and see like, okay, maybe you should reconsider. He's probably not going to, but it made me like, I was like, yes, go Robin, like that's awesome.
But it's time that professors began to recognize the sort of orthodox blinkers they have around the scientific worldview, because it has directly led to the denaturing of our planet. It has directly, another term, I'm sorry, that I learned from this whole series is, and it's in your, now I know that where that term is because you put it in one of your glossaries. It was technoscience.
Oh yeah, technoscience.
Right. Now, technoscience to me seems to be the word that we should be using over just this concept of a pure science, because technoscience has literally denatured the planet. We won't be talking about climate change or any other thing. We just really need to get to the truth of it, which is that our objectification of nature has resulted in us stripping nature, believing that our rational minds can do something better, create a better version of the world. Yeah, it was in from the technoscience. And so it behooves all these science professors to not just gung-ho teach great science, but to understand the relationship of what they're teaching to the world and to the way that it has permeated people's minds and attitudes and behaviors and cultures' expression of limitless taking from the earth. Would you agree, anyone?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think that's the whole point of what her writing is, trying to show the beauty in nature and to rise above the techno science. I agree. It's great that she didn't put anybody down, but it's even more effective that she didn't. And you know, it's just no secret that her popularity since this book was written. I mean, I just noticed last week this is still number 26 and 12 on the New York Times bestseller list, and it's been on it for 26 weeks. And this book was written years ago. So it's like people are just, it's like a grassroots movement, and more people are just clamoring to hear this message. So bravo to her for, you know, being able to be a scientist and to combine the Native American wisdom that, you know, people are just starting to realize, a lot of, not Native Americans, of course, but everybody else, that this is a wisdom that is sorely needed. And we're just, I think a lot of people are just waking up to it. So yeah, I love this discussion. It's very, very thought provoking. So thank you.
I just also want to mention, I was going to reach out to Lauren this week, because earlier, maybe a couple of weeks ago, we read the story about the Sky Woman and how two different cosmologies result in these two different worldviews, you know, with a fallen world and a sort of a wretched relationship with the earth, versus Sky Woman, the Sky Woman story of feeling supported by the fraternity of all creatures, and we're all, you know, relating to each other as an interrelated web. And I had, I read large excerpts of Laudato Si which is the Pope's encyclical from 2015. And Lauren, I don't know if you've had a chance to read it or if others have had a chance to read it, but it really struck me that the way that Robin Wall Kimmerer has sort of, in a way, characterized the Christian cosmology, the Judeo-Christian cosmology, and the way that I've used it for years was perhaps too essentializing of it in a certain kind of caricaturizing way. Because having read Laudato Si more deeply this time, I just realized that if we give room to be open to different interpretations, what Pope Francis has done is he's really drawn from what the bishops in multiple different cultures have been teaching. And, he said, Christianity is falsely actually painted as a religion in which the earth doesn't matter. And he goes on to draw on these multiple different teachings from different cultures in which in the Christian tradition, there is room for this sacredness of each living being and autonomy of each living being. And I wanted to bring that to you in case we ever get a chance to read it in the future, to just sort of be fair in reading how the Judeo-Christian cosmology maybe is reinterpreted in the 20th century. Maybe other people have used it poorly throughout history, but it's worth reading. It's a tremendous text that uses the most incredible avant-garde research that we have encountered through our readings here. It uses all that terminology, and it really gets to the cosmology of the Judeo-Christian tradition, and says, no, it's not quite as dismissive of the earth as you think.
Thank you. I do remember hearing his sort of speaking when he became Pope, and that will definitely go on our radar.
This last season, last fall was it, we talked about the commons, and he has a whole section in there on private property and the obligation of that there's no such thing as sort of just private property without obligations to the commons. He really addresses almost every theme that we talked about. But with respect to Robin Wall Kimmerer's book, that whole idea of the sky woman versus Adam and Eve and the garden and the two different sort of encounters of the world, he addresses that.
Okay, I'm going to find it so I can put it in the chat bar. Yeah, I'm reading I'm looking it over right now. He really does. He has section 3 is called the loss of biodiversity. And he goes through a lot of these things.
That book made me so emotional. I'm sorry, the encyclical reading Pope Francis's words made me so emotional, just like Robin Wall Kimmerer. It was so elegantly put, just the way Robin Wall Kimmerer puts it, and so accessible, and synthesized so many complex concepts that I think it's well worth our time to consider it. And there's hope that through multiple ways we might confront this awful technocratic mindset that has just living our lives as if the world is not sacred. Yeah.
Thank you, Ansu, for bringing this to our attention.
One of the writers that she references in this reading is the indigenous scholar Greg Cajete, and he's in New Mexico. He is a professor emeritus of University of New Mexico, as well as the AIAA. Maybe you know that, Lauren. It's the American Indian Institute of the Arts or something. It's a prolific institution, and one of the things that he's written, because I've read quite a bit of him, is as well the difference between the Western and the indigenous worldview is that the ultimate aim, he says, is not the aim of indigenous science is not about explaining an objectified universe, but it's about learning and understanding responsibilities and relationships and mutual reciprocity. So it's really significant that she quoted Greg Cajete. Yeah, exactly. Thanks.
The one word that really struck me in the first reading with the Native American, with the indigenous view of science, was that it was welcoming. And I thought of that when she wrote, "The bees taught me to fly." And she's talking about them gathering pollen, and it was just such a all-embracing, beautiful concept. It was just welcome to the world.
Damn, that was so good.
Hey, great idea, Lauren, for the pairing. I really liked it. I really liked it.
I think it worked really, really nicely. And that was so profound and beautiful. Like, you know, how sometimes it's always wonderful, but that was like,
Was really special. I love responding. I feel like I was able to respond in a totally different way by the way that you structured it. It was very very moving.
well, I'm so glad that the idea resonated with you. And I love the kind of whole sort of like transistor radio and bells, and it sort of paired so well with the LA River kind of telephone wires and the kind of, you know, concrete but lush like there was some kind of sympathy between all of those materials and the kind of metal of the bells and plastic and the, you know, was visually and acousmatically amazing.
Yay.
So that was all footage that you've taken, right, Emily? That was all from
Cascade and I, yeah.
from the deep, immersive, careful looking during bending the river. And then did Stefano just assemble and you didn't know what he had?
Well, it comes from
Rush dailies.
the living systems organization that we've done over the last few years. So we have that. I think that's every bird that Cascade and I have shot 2016 to 2021. Just a little snippet of each bird. So that's the short version. The long version, and I don't think it played in its entirety. The long version is several hours, you know. But it's
thanks to new genre format like Zoom, we no longer have to fit things into film festival formats to share them.
Yeah. And I was thinking about how in the reading, she's talking about trying to fit in to having the scientific world being in conflict with the poetics. And so I was thinking the radios had some piece of that in it too, like the conflict between electricity and care or something, you know.
Just beautiful. And also so kind of connected to like the poetics of Kimmerer's voice and the fact that she's also a scientist. I feel like the kind of knowledge of the media and the deep looking and the poetics helped me to bridge the gaps, you know, between knowing and embodying that knowledge.
Yeah.
Really, you guys made such a huge contribution tonight. Thank you. I'll always do, but that was, I'll have some of those images in my head for a long time. I forgot about that dying duck.
I know. So did I.
I wish I didn't relate to it so much.
I know.
But
I know.
That's a very potent.
I know.
Potent thing to have observed. And I remember when you observed it.
Yeah. Yeah. I remember Cascade being very shook up.
Yeah, I remember her coming out of the river and
yeah. Yeah, it's amazing the having these living systems reels that we have. I've noticed that the relentless structuring of seeing one bird after another, or seeing one rock after another, or seeing one insect after another, or one tree, I really do find myself being able to bridge the gap and identify with the subject. Like after I watch the whole bird reel, I feel like, oh, I have a better sense of what it's like to wake up and be a bird each day, you know? In terms of like embodying that feeling or the knowledge. It's interesting because so much of the cinematic gaze has maybe historically not been structured that way. Maybe the cinematic gaze has been structured to put humans at the center of the universe, in the center of our stories. But I like how our archive of videos is really trying to shift and expand the scope.
And I think also there's this thing about the fact that the bottom of the concrete of the LA River flood control measure, you can't see it from anywhere. So
Right.
you're also kind of like seeing the unseen.
Yeah.
And so like that's there's some, it sort of just makes me kind of think back to the whole idea of underground cinema.
Yeah.
That's like the underground cinema is like literally what you don't see, that is like a fully functioning living system that is not a thing. It's a no thing in conversation about the city. I don't mean like politically or through media, but just in the consciousness of what is here now, like at this moment.
Right.
The idea that you don't have anything else but that, it's just like eyes on another parallel. It's not another reality, it's a parallel reality. It doesn't take away one, but it does include many others. Like you could have infinite views of the same place at the same time.
Yeah.
I want to be careful not to demystify too much, but I have a question since I don't live there. That looks to me to be the representation of an ecosystem that's thriving in spite of, right? I'm watching all the birds, and especially that the one, was it a white egret of some kind or something like this? Just dashing around looking for, I expect like shaking the bottom of the bed, right? The bottom of the river to see if anything comes up, but then maybe getting bugs on top or something on the surface or something like that. I'm wondering, is that like a, in the desert we have stop through areas of water, right? How is the LA River treated in that way for birds? Is it for migration? Is it for creating home? Is there anything in the water to eat? These are my questions.
We're currently looking at that under a microscope, and also we have a couple of fish tanks full of LA River samples that we're observing. And actually, Mish can probably tell you more than anyone since he's been looking at those things. Do you want to answer, Mish?
To answer your question, there is an ecosystem, and yes, it has become a permanent home for many species, and many we found when we started to go in the river, and we were looking at, not without a microscope, just walking around and realizing, oh, there are shrimps, and we couldn't believe it because we treated for me, the LA River coming from Europe, the only image I had were just cars driving at the bottom. And all of a sudden, I realized that there's life, and this permanent life. There are people, there are animals using that as a migratory path, but there's also animal who thrives there. There's a whole ecosystem. So as Lauren says, if you take a sample of a river, with it, you're going to collect algae, fungi, shrimps, all kinds of aquatic life. And this aquatic lives attract birds. And egrets, I've seen egrets, if they don't find enough to eat at the bottom of the river, they'll go on the bank and they'll look for lizards. And I don't know of ecosystems. This is typically an LA thing. I mean, the LA River where we are is not exactly large and doesn't provide much. So those birds, they're not migratory. They stay there and they'll expand their path to find more food. So yes, it is a whole ecosystem, and it's thriving. It's incredible.
That's amazing. That just unbroke my heart. Thank you. That's wonderful. Thank you.
It's insane how much there's growing in the concrete of the flood control measure that we call a river. And there's so much water there, even in like periods of 9 months of drought, because all the streams that feed the LA River are the gutters that run down streets, the wastewater gutters that run down streets. So all the people watering their lawns or cleaning the sidewalks, all of that ends up in the LA River. And a lot of it is treated before it goes out to sea for the worst things. But you know, when they say water is life, they're not kidding. Like it's a really abundant, fully formed association of living things, both fungal and yeasts and bacterias and bugs and, you know, arthropods and snails and mollusks and pollinators and spiders and coyotes and cats and birds and crows and ravens and red-tailed hawks and hummingbirds and sparrows and pigeons. And the only thing that's not there is like suburbia, which which is probably you know, you got some filmmakers down there making rock videos and plenty of unhoused people who are using that water supply. So it's not a no place, like, and, you know, there is a sense of desperation living in a concrete piece of infrastructure, but from a water perspective, it's also not like, it's not inert. It's not like what you get from like cleaning it out of everything and then zapping it with chlorine, where almost everything would die and have to regrow again, which it would do in like 5 minutes as soon as it got warm and still, and all the bacteria would come back. But it's really surprising how much is there. And we're trying to find out as much as we can about it so that we know what we're picking up when we divert this low flow channel of the LA River in order to form a new utility. Because it's not a product, it's its own living thing, and nobody really knows anything about it. I mean, I'm sure there are people, but we don't know them. So we had to like find it out ourselves.
Thank you, Michelle and Lauren, for, you know, explaining all of that to me, who does not have the, well, the awareness, but also the familiarity, you know. And I love, Emily, how the video is so observational, and it's hard. Like, I think that's why maybe we were really struck down by the death of that what is it, the Canada goose or Canadian goose? Like, of course, we don't want to watch suffering of any kind. But that was really hard, because we're just kind of sitting with it. And it's almost like I had a moment of like, no, stop the camera, help.
Right.
Just like in those nature videos, you're like, why am I watching this?
I know.
Why am I doing this to myself? So
I
thank
know
you.
that if Cascade could have done something, she would, but at the moment she encountered it, there was no chance, you know. But that's the interesting thing about making these shorter form edits of the video is taking, say we have 20 hours of bird documentation to choose 5 seconds to share and try and share some bit of truth from what we witnessed of the climate and its moment in time that we were there to observe, you know. So to give an impression, like, you know, a diary, visual diary. Look at the little baby who's here.
Hi, June.
Judy.
Hi, June.
Do you want to talk? You don't.
June, what are you eating?
Ramen and oatmeal.
Oatmeal? Is it good?
Nice.
What is it?
Flower from Poppy. Poppy's cash.
Ooh.
Is it carnation? Yeah. You say hello.
Hi.
Hi.
Hi, Junie.
Well, there's Lauren and Jen and Izzy
And me.
and you.
Hi.
And not me.
I can't see you.
We can see you.
I'm trying to hide.
Each of you. Thank you all, Emily and Izzy. That reading was, the whole thing was so deeply meditative. I was in a trance when Lauren spoke. It startled me. No, it was beautiful. No, that was a good thing. I mean, say that's how sort of deeply the other day when it was really foggy, I don't know if it was like this up there, but where I am, it was really foggy, and a friend of mine and I were talking about the palpable different sense of being in the fog, you know, because it takes you into a more just a different space, and that's kind of how I felt with the audio that you was beautiful, really nice. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you for being here, Laura.
Yeah, I love the reading too. There was an invitation to you know, ask in the bigger questions of what if we were able to re-indigenize, you know, all of the lands and all of the practices. Just it was very much aligned with the session last summer, I think, you know, around the fire. But that today, that reading also really spoke to that around the beauty and honoring of the original practices. So I really appreciated that.
Good night.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
See you all next week.
Night, you guys.
Good night.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Take good care, y'all. I'll see you next time.
See you next time. Good night.
Bye.
Night.
Bye-bye.